Hi, I'm sorry it has been a while again. I know I'm really, really bad at remembering, even with an official schedule and stuff. Anyway, let's get started. Chapter 11 Tampering. Within the greater world of the Raider ship, Derek had been confined to one small island. As he prepared to begin his nocturnal wanderings, that island consisted of the route from the lab, in which he thought of as Hull L, to the dispensary and personal, in Hull D. Linking the ends of the trail were two sections of storage corridor, forming a short transfer tunnel between the hulls. And that was all Derek knew. He did not know where the lab was in relation to Aranimus's command center, though he felt certain that it was some distance away. For that matter, he did not know the way to any of the other places he had been: the hole where he had seen the star creatures, the corridor in which he had awoken, the hole from which the salvage team had operated, the section of the lockers where the robot parts had been stored. He did not know where Woolruff slept, or where the 15 Army were most likely to be found. The corridor to the dispensary was the only part of the ship in which he had explicit permission to be in. Arrhenius had not forbidden him to roam farther afield, but neither had he invited it. It seemed to Derek as though it might be some kind of test. The problem was, he didn't know whether he would fail through action or inaction, by exploring or by staying close to home. In the end, Derek set aside his uncertainties with the thought that it was always better to know more than to know less. If Arrhenius found out and objected, Derek could always offer the excuse that he was scouting for places and tasks to test the robot. The ranks of closed lockers in the transfer tunnel had been gnawing at his curiosity for nearly 2 days, and he started by opening all that were within his reach. He did not know exactly what he had expected to find, but the fact that more than half the lockers were empty came as a surprise. Those that were full contained some recognizable objects, such as bolts of cloth from which the Narvi clothing was made, replacement electrodes for the micro-welder in the lab, and vacuum-sealed food stores. A few of the lockers were either jammed or locked. Derek could not determine which. Just as he was finishing in the section closest to the dispensary, one of the false-horned Narvi entered through the single side door. Startled, Derek jumped guiltily, then froze. Without making any sign of acknowledgment Derek could recognize, the alien turned its back and left by the lab end door, saying nothing. Alone again, Derek felt foolish, for he had every right to be there, and the alien had seen nothing incriminating. But his heart raced as though he had been caught by Arrhenius himself. He was not worried about the Narvi trying to stop him, since he was confident that he could be at least as intimidating as Woolruff. But there was always the chance that a Narvi, perhaps hoping to curry favour, would carry a tale to Arrhenius and bring him investigating. Since Derek did not want to give Arrhenius reasons to mistrust him, he decided he would have to forego rummaging through the lockers, at least as long as there were still Narvi afoot. It was the one activity his excuse would not cover. Derek next took up a fuller exploration of the two hulls he had ready access to. 3 doors down from the personal in Hull D he found a compartment containing 5 deep-cushioned chairs, arrayed in a circle and facing inward. At the center of the circle was a pale white globe mounted on a black cylindrical base. The globe was so large that Derek's arms could barely reach halfway around. But finding did not mean understanding. For all he could divine, the globe could easily be a religious totem as a as a communications device, and the compartment as easily as a sanctuary as a bridge. There was no point in risking his position just to multiply his ignorance, So for the second time in half an hour, Derek altered his strategy. All that mattered was rediscovering the route back to Hull A, Arrhenius's quarters, and to Hull T, where the transfer and perhaps his augment could be found. Nothing else was of any consequence whatsoever. There were 5 exits from the deck of Hull D, 2 from Hull L, and 2 from the transfer tunnel. He considered simply taking one and following it wherever it led, but did not trust himself to find his way back. Instead, he worked at expanding the boundaries of his known world slowly. Each time he opened a new door and started off on an unfamiliar corridor, he would turn left, and then left again, as soon as possible in the hopes of returning in a loop to some part of the world he knew. Only when he memorized each of those additions would he take a branch off a branch. The first time his strategy worked. The side door in the transfer tunnel led him, 3 turns later, to Hull L, 1 deck down from the lab. Despite the fact that he sighted 2 Na'vi along the way, the success gave him a rush of confidence. But then it began to get messy. The other exit from the lab level of Hull L went on through 7 sections with no side branches. Possibly it went on further still, but Derek would never know, since he grew timid and turned back. One of the exits from Hull D led to a sloping ramp into a weapons turret occupied by one of Arrhenius's kin and a Narwi, another hasty retreat. Another, farther aft, led to one of the hexagonal junction points. He chose a door at random and found himself in another junction. There was just no way around it. The ship was an impenetrable maze, its key elements linked in a hopelessly inefficient and disorderly manner. Derek could think of only 2 explanations for it. One had to do with defense. The arrangement could probably served to disguise the crucial targets, and was certain to frustrate intruders. The other explanation was that the ship was just what it appeared to be, a jury-rigged mismatch of ships that had never been intended to be joined together. Whichever was the case, Dirk was on the verge of concluding that the ship was too complex for him to ever hold this plan in his head, when he felt a queer momentary sensation of being turned inside out. The moment he felt it, he started back toward the laboratory, his jaw set in a grim expression. He wanted to believe it was only a moment of dizziness, a sign of creeping fatigue, but he could not. For the feeling was nothing new to Derek. It was a jump, that oddly incomprehensible, almost mystical, momentary transition through hyperspace that transferred a ship and all it contained from one point in space to another, light years away. Wherever they had been, they were somewhere else now, far away from the asteroid base, far away from any ship that might have been en route there to rescue him. He should have guessed that the raiders had jump technology, for the design of the ship would never have stood up to any sort of conventional propulsion. But he had not, and the discovery jolted him, bringing back full force the feeling of powerlessness that he had felt in the robot's custody. No one's gonna find me now, he thought despairingly, not if I live to be 1,000. The lab was empty except for the robot when Derek reached it. Alpha. Yes, Derek? Did you monitor a jump a short time ago? No, Derek. Since the reflexes of my postronic brain are so much faster than yours, robots do not experience the disorientation common among humans. Then you can't tell me anything about it, how far we might have jumped. Without knowing the power curve of the vessel's drive, I would not have been able to interpolate from the duration. I would have not been able to interpolate from the duration of the jump in any case, the robot said. However, that does not rule out the second-hand evidence concerning our destination. What second-hand evidence? Where did you get it? Sir, Arrhenius and Woolruff held a discussion about this in my presence. When? This evening, less than 1 decade ago. It was my impression that they had come here to find you, but in your absence lingered to examine me. Woolruff described the work she had observed you doing, how my position varied each time she visited, and pointed out to Arrhenius several of my axis points and described what lay under them. I thought she was spying on me, Derek fumed. What else happened? Aranimus seemed disturbed that you were absent without supervision, and ordered Woolruff to watch you more closely in the future. Get to the point. Where are we? Where are we going? I was forced to make certain inferences from what I heard, but I believe we are making an inbound approach to a site where Randomus expects to retain a large quantity of additional robots. Repeat the relevant part of the conversation. Yes, Derek. The voices were so faithfully duplicated that if Derek closed his eyes, he would have sworn Randomus and Woolruff were in the room with him. We have been away from Master a long time, said Woolruff. The now we are restless for Omerds. Even I grow weary from time to time. Is it truly necessary to go to another Omen nest? I will not go back empty-handed, Randomus said. You have the jewel, this robot, and more besides. You have executed your promises to Weavra. Surely enough glory will flow from those accomplishments. This is not for discussion, Aramis said curtly. I will have robots to serve me. The human Derek said there would be robots at any human world, and that they would trade with us if we came in peace. We will allow them to think we come in peace, and then take what we need. Then, and only then, will we set course for Mesrith. Wilruf's voice took on a pleading, whiny tone. The Na'vi are truly worthless ones, there can be no doubt. But if we were to lose the jewel in hand while reaching for a bit of glass. The robot interrupted himself. At this point, Aranimus produced a weapon I cannot identify and pointed it at Woolruff. It seemed to cause Woolruff great distress. Then it continued in Aranimus's voice. You disappoint me, Woolruff. I thought you had more vision than that. Without the robots, I will have to surrender the jewel to Weira, and when we return, which I have no intention of doing. Better that you and I are turned to atoms here than give up that key to such as Weira. The robot fell silent, and Derek found himself with nothing to say. One more stop, and the raiders were going home for their treasure. Where that stop was, there was no guessing. There were hundreds of spacer facilities scattered over hundreds of light years. It could be a customs station lying between a settler and spacer territory, a mining or processing center, or even one of the research complexes. It might be staffed with humans and robots, or robots alone. It didn't matter. He would never see it. Would use him, his knowledge, his voice, perhaps even his image, to gain entry to the installation. And when the aliens' business there was done, the ship would leave for Mrestv, where Derek was destined to be nothing better than a slave, and perhaps nothing more than a curiosity. The realization of his impotence shattered Derek. He had taken the lone road and done everything he could by himself. He had schemed and blustered and fought and finagled his way past each succeeding challenge. But now the challenge now facing him seemed insurmountable. Sometime within the next few days he had to escape, from a ship in which he could not yet find his way around, from a jailer whose capabilities he had not yet fully gauged, to a refuge whose promise of safety was more hopeful than real. The fight drained out of him as he confronted the bleak possibilities. Aranimus had all the advantages. He would have Derek watched constantly while they were docked at the installation, if they docked at all, and Derek could not move sooner, for he could never hold the ship. He was outnumbered, 80-1 by the crew. All Derek had was the robot, and that was not enough. I can't do it, he thought despairingly, but I can't just give up. The conflicting thoughts chased each other through his mind, neither gaining the advantage. Weary and confused, he retreated to the far side of the room and huddled there against the base of the wall. I've got to have help, he realized at last. I've got to stop trying to do it all by myself. Got to trust someone. To that or resign myself to living the rest of my life on an alien world. And then it came to him that there was someone else on board who was just as alone, just as helpless, who might not only take comfort but courage from a companion. Someone, in fact, who had already proclaimed herself Derek's friend. If she'll help, Derek thought, we might we just might do it at all. At that. An hour of waiting had slipped by. Reinvigorated by hope, Derek's attention had wandered from watching the doorway to playing with the pieces of the puzzle. "You're back!" a gruff voice intruded. Derek raised his head and looked toward Woolruff. "I went walking. You've been looking for me, haven't you?" "Aranimus was looking for you," Der Woolruff corrected. "You stay here now, okay?" "Is he coming back?" "Boss is resting now. He'll come to see you in the morning. Best you be here," Woolruff said, turning away. "You got in trouble for Animus because I was gone, didn't you?" Derek called after her. The Canaanoid stopped, looked back and shrugged. "I'm sorry," Derek said. "I put you in a bad position." "It's nothing new. I put myself there enough." Derek smiled. "Tell me something, Woolruff. What are you doing here? Why are you working for someone like Aranimus?" "Too long story to explain. You're not on board by choice, are you? Too complicated to explain. I've got the time, and I really want to help. I want to know." Woolruff hesitated, then advanced a few steps into the room. "Should go sleep," she said gruffly. "Why not do what you want to instead of what you ought to?" Crouching an arm's length away, Woolruff grinned. "That the secret of her success?" It took longer than it should have to sort out the story. Woolruff never had to talk about her home and life to someone who did not know the 1,001 things that a person living within a culture knows without thinking. Again and again, Derek had to ask her to go back and fill in some clarifying detail. Beyond that, there were language problems, as some of what Woolruff was trying to convey ran up against the limits of her standard vocabulary. At other times, she seemed to be talking around some fact or idea that she did not feel comfortable disclosing. Piecing together what he heard and filling in a few blanks of the blanks on his own, Derek gained a reasonably coherent answer to his question. Despite Woolruff's boast of 200 inhabited worlds, the crew of the ship was from a single solar system. Aranimus's kind, the Urani, and the Nari lived on the second planet, Messereth, which by Woolruff's description was a hot, wind-swept, unpleasant world. Woolruff's kind, the name was just as unpronounceable as Woolruff's own. The elusive star creatures were from the temperate fourth planet. The relationship between the Nari and the Irani was like that between sheep and their shepherds, except that Nari were more intelligent and physically adept than sheep. But the comparison was still adept. The Nari vastly outnumbered the Irani, but the Irani, aggressive, inventive, acquisitive, were completely dominant. The relationship between the two worlds was rather more complex, and Derek did not completely understand it. Neither planet seemed to have a unified government. That might have been the only thing that kept them from going to war, for there was clearly a basic apathy between them, or antipathy between them. Despite that, there was an active commerce between the worlds. At the center of it were trading companies owned by several factions of Irani, and goods produced by several families of Woolruff's people. Woolruff did not talk about Aranimus in particular, but he seemed to be a younger member of one of the more powerful Urani factions. Derek gleaned that somehow Woolruff's family had run afoul of Aranimus's trading company. "My service on this mission lifts the Jigr from my family," she explained. The Jigr, Derek determined after much questioning, was equivalent to a blacklist, while in effect no Irani would deal with the family. That made Woolruff, in essence, an indentured servant, a slave, working off her family's debt. "Why were you chosen?" "I am the youngest, least valuable to my family." Derek did not want to rush to judge an entire culture on one story from one family member, but he found himself getting angry over the injustice. Is that why a randomist treats you the way he does? Is that part of the deal, that he gets to push you around? That is the Irani way. They treat everyone so. Not each other, Derek said. And that's what makes it so wrong. It was then that Derek realized that somewhere in the course of the conversation, something unexpected had happened. He had drawn Woolworth out, selfishly, calculatingly. It was just another angle to exploit. But as he had listened to her, his false sympathy for her plight became real empathy for her pain. She was a victim just as she was. But she seemed uncomfortable with his concern. Not our trouble. Woolworth, you said you were my friend. Let me be yours. What do you mean? The rank miss is working you like a slave and abusing you like an animal. It doesn't have to be that way. We can put a stop to it together. How? I have a tool, he said, nodding toward the robot, and I have some ideas. But I need you to tell me some things about our animus and how the ship's controlled. Woolworth looked uncomfortable, and Derek was afraid that he had gone too fast and frightened her. You want the jewel back. You want the jewel back, she said. Honesty was an imperative. I do. You will take it and leave me to face the Renimus. Derek shook his head empathetically. I do have to get away. I can't let our Renimus take me back to Massadruf. But if I can't leave you in a better situation than you are now, I'll take you with me. Well, Ruff, we're the only ones who can help each other. If we don't try, then we deserve what happens to us. The Kananoid met Derek's questioning gaze unblinkingly. That is true. Okay, friend. Let's try. There seemed to be something in the biology of Woolruff's kind which sharpened the imperative for sleep and rejuvenation. It was almost as though there was within a metabolic switch, which once tripped, told them in no uncertain terms that the primary energy fund had been exhausted and it was time to withdraw. And a half hour later they began talking. With only some of Derek's questions answered and their plan barely sketched out, Woolworth's alarm went off. Her eyes narrowed to slits, her breath took on a sour tang, and her fur lay flat and seemed to lose lustre. Though he still had many urgent questions, Derek did not even get a chance to try to coax her to stay. With no more explanation than a muttered "must sleep," she rose and was gone. Woolruff's departure made Derek suddenly aware of his own weary limbs, but there was one further task he had to see to before he could think about curling up on the thin mattress. The robot was waiting where it had settled after completion Derek's last order several hours ago. But that was no surprise. There was an unusual passiveness to the robot's behavior ever since Derek had activated it. A passiveness above and beyond the wait states he had prescribed. A normal robot had a variety of duties it attended to without external direction, following the default orders built into it for its primary function: domestic, laborer, engineer, and the like. The robot's initiative apparently fallen victim to the burned out memory cubes and the cold power down, but it still had the second law, so it sat and waited patiently for the words from Derek that would give it something to do. Derek's first act was to pull the mathematics cube and replace it with the personal defense cube. The additional pathways in the PD cube would enhance the robot's sense of impending harm and its anxiety to act to prevent it. But they would also suppress the robot's normal inclination to protect him from immediate concrete risks without regard to the consequences of doing so. First Law did not have any exceptions built into it for taking well-intentioned gambles. The PDQ provided them. Alpha, Derek said when he was done, my previous instructions for you to go into wait state when one of the aliens approaches are now cancelled, but where possible, you are still to avoid revealing the unique capabilities of your right arm. I understand, Derek. I am now going to give you a block of instructions which will not become operative until you hear the initiate code. The initiate code, which must come from me, is the question, who is your master? The disable code is the word Aurora. I understand, Derek. Begin instruction block. You will answer the initiate code with the reply anonymous. You will go with Hieronymus wherever he wishes you to go. You are to follow his orders except where they conflict with the first, second, or third laws or this instruction block. You will not follow orders given by Woolruff or any other non-human member of the crew. You will not accept any additional orders from me unless preceded by the disable code. You will respond to informational inquiries from Woolruff or myself. However, you will not relate, reply, or in any way communicate to Hieronymus this conversation or any other conversation of me which he did not witness. Clarification. You wish for Hieronymus to believe that I am completely in his service. Suspend. I do, Derek said. If he's going to get any use out of you, he's going to have to teach you about the ship. Anything you learn helps us escape. I understand the necessity for intelligence, sir, the robot said, but if I am to protect you, I must remain at your side. Derek had expected this objection. PD circuits made robots more argumentative. Since Hieronymus is in command of the ship, he is the real threat to me. Only his actions or his orders can harm me. By remaining close to him, you'll be best able to protect me. I understand, sir. All right, resume. There are two things that we particularly need to know. A valuable object came aboard of me. A metallic rectangle, silver color, about 5 by 10 centimeters. I think it's the same object Hieronymus called the key, and Woolruff the jewel. It's apparently valuable and powerful. We need to know where it is. Yes, Derek. I'll be particularly alert for clues to this object's whereabouts. The other thing we need to know is what space or facility we're heading for, and when we're going to get there. If we wait too long to move, Hieronymus will have us locked up somewhere to keep us out of his hair while he's stealing robots. That would be a redundant precaution. Which means that Hieronymus will probably think of it, Derek said. If you learn where the key is located, you are to wait 1 decade, then simulate a code 804 malfunction. If you learn where we are headed or when we arrived, you are to wait 15 centads, then simulate a code 3033 malfunction. End instruction block. Though he knew what he hoped for would happen from that point onward, Derek stopped there. Verbal instruction in advance was a tricky enough matter, requiring the skills of a semantist with the foresight of a seer. He did not wish to saddle the robot with excessive, specific, and possibly useless orders. Much work and intelligence had gone into designing the PD library cube. Derek would have to trust that, when the time came, Alpha would grasp the situation and do what was required. Okay. Well, that was a really long chapter.